Hey everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. More Minion Masters news today. We're going to talk about the upcoming balance changes in the current PTR, the public test realm. Now, if you're not aware of what that is, if you join the Minion Masters Discord, link in the description, you can give yourself the tester role and that will give you access to the PTR channels where you can see the upcoming changes, the upcoming cards, and crucially, have your say. So the idea is you can have a look at these changes, try them out on a test build of the game, as well as the new cards, and then give your feedback to the devs. And then based on that feedback and whatever else is garnered at that time, then the devs can make whatever appropriate changes to the cards or the balance before we go to the live patch. So we're going to be talking about Minion Masters 2.4. Now, what I'm not going to do in this video is talk about the upcoming cards, because I don't really want to spoil those for people until they are properly live. But if you want to see them for yourself, as I said, you can join the Discord and check out the cards and check out the test version of the game. Right, so 2.4 balance survey. Again, I'll put a link to this document in the description so you can read it yourself and also hopefully complete it yourself. So you can read the changes and then give your feedback theoretically, or you can test them out and give your feedback based on what you've actually tried. Okay, so let's go through these one at a time, see what we think about them. So Arcane Barrage, spark damage going up from 55 to 60. Don't hate it, don't know if it necessarily needs a buff. I think it's just not getting played very much at the moment, especially with resonating blast crystal everywhere. And then remember, the way the barrage works is that it does it starts at 3, I think, and goes up to 10. So max damage up to 600 from 550. I mean, it makes it stronger. And of course, just a little bit of a buff moves the kill points, that it may take only 2 hits to kill something that it previously would take 3. So definitely could be stronger. How much stronger? We're not sure. I like this one. Arcane Bolt only triggers mana freeze when the destroy effect occurs. So Arcane Bolt is a 3 mana, 2 mana freeze spell, where it was previously. So that means it costs 5 mana, but you can use it when you have 3. And the way it works is it will stun the target. I think the kill threshold is 450 HP. And if the target is above that, it will be stunned. If it's below that, it will be destroyed. If it's above there and then drops below it whilst it's stunned, it will also be destroyed. So you did have the awkward situation where you could use it, and if you misplay it, then you just get the stun, you don't get the destroy, and it would cost you the full 5 mana. Your opponent can also play around it if they can kind of predict when you're going to use it, and then put a high HP unit next to their unit that you're trying to kill. They can potentially save it. So the change is that the mana freeze only triggers when the destroy effect occurs. So if you play it on something that's over 450 health, it will then just stun it. And that's going to be for 3 mana. And then if it does destroy it, dropping below the 450 HP, then the 2 mana freeze will trigger. So definitely a buff. Pretty much it. I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. Right, Cage Prowler. So little bit of a change to the Cage Prowler. So the way the Cage Prowler works is it's a building, it has decay, it has to have a certain amount of health left when it had finished decaying after a certain amount of time. If it had enough health, it would spawn the Prowler. The problem with that is that it was never obvious if you'd done enough damage to it to stop it from spawning. Because you would do the damage and then it would continue decaying, and then you'd get that moment about whether it spawns or it doesn't, and then it looks like it's spawning but it doesn't. So they've changed that, so no building decay anymore. So it starts with 100 health, and basically if you kill it, no Prowler. If you don't kill it, Prowler after a certain amount of time. So it makes it far more easy to see whether you've killed it and prevented the Prowler, or whether you haven't done enough damage to it yet. So that's a nice change. I always felt there should be some way of telling if you've done enough damage to it, some kind of visual thing, whereas this kind of achieves it in a more sort of dramatic way. If the building's there, the Prowler can spawn. If it's not, it can't. Damage required to prevent trigger threshold, 96 to 100. I'm sure it was less than 96 before. Maybe not. But that's not really much of a change. Almost like a rounding error. So, you know, what cannot kill it now that could kill it before? Pretty much, it's almost the same. Chain lightning will still kill it, for example. Right, so I think that's a nice change to the Cage Prowler. More of a sort of a quality of life change rather than a real sort of buff or a nerf. But, I mean, also, not knowing whether the Prowler was going to spawn or not was frustrating for both you as the Prowler player and the opponent. So, definitely a nice change for both players. Crossbow Clubhouse. I'm not a massive fan of this change. And I'll tell you why. So the idea of this is it's a building, does damage, and then when it dies, it drops the units out of it, which is something we haven't seen in Minion Masters, right? It's kind of like a spawner building, but it only has one wave at the end of it, but it does damage, which is, we don't have any buildings that do that, so it's nice. But some people like the idea of it being a building that you can keep alive and do damage, and then it spits out the units as a bonus. Other people want it to spit out the units as quickly as possible. And this change seems to be catered to those kind of people. So the health going up to 400. So the amount of time the building's alive for is also going down from 30 to 10. So 400 health, but it only lasts for 10 seconds. So you only get 10 seconds of that DPS, and then you get the units coming out of it. So depending on how you use it, that could be a buff, could be a nerf, but I'm not a huge fan of that. I just want to see them give it extra range. Those ranged units in a tower, they must have more range than a regular crossbow dude, right? Right, Feng the Wanderer. Health going up to 375 from 350. I don't mind that. You also got to remember that his health is sort of a factor in how big he grows with the buffs that he might get from Spirit or Giant Growth. So this is kind of it's not just a straight HP buff like it would be on other units. This buff can also be felt sort of multiple times, depending on what buffs you're giving it. Remember, Feng now has the Bulwark ability, which is getting nerfed. So we'll have a look at that in a minute. So whilst he is getting more HP, he is getting a nerf through the Bulwark being nerfed. Right, Incubus. So Incubus is the, I don't know, sibling of the Succubus, and he's the anti-range one, so he'll jump towards ranged minions that attack him. And he's being even more buffed against ranged minions, where he's going to be proposed to gain Bulwark. So we'll see that in a minute. That's going to be minus 35% damage against ranged minions. So he's going to be pretty tanky against range. So depending on what the meta's like, if the meta's, for example, Crystal Elves, lots of ranged units, you'll see a lot more of the Incubus, especially if he gets this change. Other than that, not really sure. Right, Kernath Crystalback, health going up from 300 to 350, just not getting played very much, I guess. Did get bug fixed in the last patch, so he should trigger correctly. Kernath is one of those units that he's very niche. You're only going to play it in decks that have a lot of spells, a lot of cheap spells. So it's not something you're going to see too often, but I think he's pretty decent if you use him appropriately. Right, Nazara, the Cold Countess, she's getting a buff. She was added in the last patch, of course. Saw very little of her, to be honest, and I've got my meta review video coming up soon, so make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on that. And we'll have a look at what sort of play rate Nazara's had in that. We know that Rystar, one of the newest cards, was being played a lot. Is that still the case? Again, we'll look into that. So her Vampiric. So she has... Okay, so her and the Frostfang Familiar previously both had Vampiric at 20%, but I believe that they're getting separated now. She has a better Vampiric. So she has a True Blood Vampiric or something. So that's 30% healing on kill as opposed to 20%, and her health going up from 400 to 450. So some decent buffs, but we'll see if she gets more play. Now this is a weird one to me, Sniper Squad. So Sniper Squad's where you get the two regular snipers. Starts stealthed on play, no bonus damage, So the reason they specify that is because a lot of the stealth units have damage multipliers coming out of stealth, like an assassin or a shadow whelp. So they have a single-use stealth, which might get the keyword sneaky, we're not sure. So basically they start stealthed. As soon as they become unstealthed, either by attacking or taking damage, then that's their stealth over with. Not really sure. Feels like the card needs a buff, but the devs are not quite sure how to do it. Can't really buff the sniper squad snipers without buffing the other snipers. Like, I don't feel like there's going to be many situations where this stealth is going to change much about it, and it just kind of feels a little bit confusing. Like, why do these guys start invisible, whereas the regular sniper doesn't? And then you've got Stixie in there as well. I just feel like it adds additional unnecessary confusion. Not sure. Don't like it. But yeah, the problem with the sniper squad is you've got two very cheap, weak units that are generally next to each other, which is just very easy to remove. Right. So we spoke just a little bit about the Vampiric. So the Vampiric for the Frostfang Familiar, as I understand it, is not changing. It's staying as the regular Vampiric, 20%. So remember, the Frostfang Familiar is like the Haunting Hugger, but the good version, so it buffs your units by giving them Vampiric. The cost is going down from 3 to 2. Still get it, means you can get it from Apep now, and the health is going down a little bit from 75 to 50. The mana cost reduction is probably the biggest thing there. I mean, it needs something. Whether that's what it needs, it will see more play. But let's see how that turns out. Right, Rimmergul's Breath. Rimmergul's Breath is the up and down one, the blue one, not the side-to-side green one, that's Nirvir's Breath. So Rimmergul's Breath, damage up from 150 to 180. So that suddenly starts to kill a lot more things than it did previously. No longer leaves the Rhymefire trail. No longer deals damage over time. All damage happens in one instant. I'm not sure if that's on both sides. I haven't tried this particular spell, but we'll see how that goes. And it immediately freezes. So it does the 180 damage and then freezes, so that we don't have any freeze damage reduction. No longer has true damage. So, I mean, Rimmergul's Breath, I feel like the metas, when it's been strong, have been kind of meh. It's kind of like how Nirvir's Breath, when it's strong, the metas are also meh, especially in 2v2. I don't hate this, but it needs something. But that more damage is going to be important. And also the fact it does its damage instantly makes it a lot easier to target. Remember, previously you had the flying and then coming back, and then you've got the damage over time, and you've got to make sure you get it right, especially on moving units, whereas now... so it's been simplified a little bit as well. Nerfs. Apep Shield Totem down to 350. Like, we know Apep, and again, check out the meta video coming up. We'll see how Apep is in the meta. We know Apep's strong, and it's not because of the HP of the Shield Totem. It's because of how much value you get from Perk 1 and Perk 3. So, something needs to be done to Perk 1 and Perk 3. Remember, you can just increase the timers to reduce the value of those. But this just feels like an easy nerf, just to say, oh look, we've nerfed him, let's see how we do. But that's probably not going to change very much at all. Right, Border Patrol, we'll see again in the meta that this has been played a lot this season. So, mana cost going down to 4 from 5, mana freeze going up from 1 to 2, so it still costs 6 mana overall. Just means you can spawn it a little earlier. And it no longer has the trigger to gain a shield, and the trigger was if you only had Crystal Elf units out. So that shield, depending on what your opponent was playing with regards to a removal spell, that shield could be huge, but will no longer be a thing. Right, Bwok going down from 50% to 35%. So as we saw earlier, that's going to affect Feng. It's going to affect Incubus if those changes go through. But of course, specifically, it's going to affect Rystar and his Centurions, because up to 10 of the next Legionnaires that he spawns will have this Bwok, but they will not be so tanky against ranged units. So I think that's healthy. Rystar is pretty strong in the meta. And one of the reasons, definitely when I've played against him, depending on what I'm playing, is the reason he's strong is that he himself is not too difficult to deal with, but he has this constant drip of value coming out with these free legionnaires, these buffed legionnaires as centurions, and that just puts a lot of pressure on the bridges. And although you can deal with it, sometimes you just end up losing on XP. Especially because Rystar is very difficult to push into. He's very punishing with that big AoE attack. Right, King Puff. This is a nerf in the form of kind of a bug fix, I guess. Because gifts no longer shield flyers. So that's his perk 2. Gifts that could previously give a shield. Well, they can still give a shield, but not to flying units. I like that because consistency for me is the key. Nothing else can shield flyer units, so why should King Puff? We like that change. Right, Resonating Blast Crystal, that's been everywhere this season. So it's getting a small nerf. Initial blast damage down from 120 to 80. But that doesn't affect the explosion of the crystal damage. So remember, it drops the crystal, and if there's 2 crystals in play at any one time, they both explode. And their explosion is for 120 each. So it's just the initial blast damage, and they are working on updating the VFX to be visually distinct from the blast crystal explosions. That's a work in progress. Okay, Sapphire Pebble gets a similar change to what we saw with the Cage Prowler. So it no longer has that building decay, so you're not sure, you don't have that situation where have I done enough damage to kill it? Is it going to respawn? Because remember, the Sapphire Pebble attacks and then it grows again if you don't shut it down. Whereas now it's going to be obvious whether you've done enough damage to shut it down. So damage to prevent it re-triggering, down from 58 to 50, so nerf. Range, that's quite a big change, down from 8 to 10. And then we've got the changes there. The respawner health, that's quite a big change as well, down from 100 to 50. So yeah, it was kind of confusing before. If you knew whether you'd shut it down or not, that confusion is going to be gone. So some quality of life changes there, and the range going down. Sapphire Pebble's very strong. You know, it's a 1 mana card that can do a decent single target removal. It can take a big hit for something. It can aggro for something. You can even prevent units, depending on their range, from taking bridges. It's a very versatile card. And that's why it's getting a little bit of a nerf here. Spelldancer, been everywhere this season. And I'm not surprised, she got buffed like crazy, and then suddenly she's incredibly strong. Who'd have thought it? So she's getting nerfed, so activated Arcane Spark, so that's her 6+ mana on play trigger ability, trigger activation, however you want to say it. So that's basically her removal spell. So the Arcane Sparks, previously it was 5, going down to 3. The Sparks damage, which is in line with the Arcane Barrage, going up a little bit. So instead of 5 times 55, it's going to be 3 times 80. So her removal is going to go down. So it's going to be easier to play around it because there's less sparks and the overall damage is going down. So I think that's definitely healthy for that. Storm Tamer. Range going down from 8 to 10. Storm Tamer is still very strong. I was surprised that the play rate stayed so high this season, even after the bugs were squished with it. It is an awkward card to play into, and this may bring it just down a little bit. It feels like it has an almost permanent CC on some units. And the reduced range means that that's not going to be quite so much the case, because the unit will be closer to it, so it will be able to get on top of it more quickly, especially after that first cyclone. Right, Tronvir, Runestones no longer freeze flyers. Again, I like this change. Not necessarily that Tronvir needs a nerf, although a lot of people would agree that he does. This is more, again, consistency. Nothing else in the game really freezes flyers. I know Nerzel's going to say, Cleanse Brew! But generally, stuff doesn't freeze flyers. I still feel a little unsure with the way the freeze works with his Frost Shield, rune, or buff, because it's weird how it freezes friendly units, freezes the thing it's on, which is not normal compared to other freeze things. And consistency for me, especially for newer players, it makes the game so much easier to learn if you just have to learn the rule of how this works instead of the rule and all of these different exceptions to the rule. Right, so those are the changes. Some good stuff coming. There's always things that people think should be nerfed and aren't. Like, for example, if you watch my tournament video, you'll see that Ardera is almost permanently nerfed, but doesn't get addressed in the balance. Why is that? Let me know in the comments what you think. As always, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything Minion Masters related. As I said a million times, I've got my meta review video coming up for this season, which should be great to see what's going on, especially for newer players. We'll look at stuff that's popular, cards, masters, decks. We'll have a good chat about that. But as always, let me know in the comments, what do you think about these changes? Do you like these changes? Do you hate any of them specifically? And crucially, are there things that need work that are being ignored? If you do, and as I said before, there will be a link to this in the description. If you do fill it out, there is a section at the end that says, basically, is there anything else that we need to address? Is there anything that we've missed? And that's your chance to have a direct line to the devs, because they will basically have a meeting based on the feedback of this, and they will go through all the responses. So if you fill out the form and you have your say, you can be sure that your voice will be heard. We have a small group of people that get involved in the PTR. It would be great to have more people, more opinions, more feedback. More is good. Anyway, that's all I wanted to bring you up to date with today. Hopefully you're having some good times out there in Minionsville. My name's Bad as a Fish, and I'll see you again soon here in the fish tank.